In a game about a boy who can see invisible people, it might not come as a surprise that sharing experiences with people who are different from you seems to be a core aspect of Tales of Zestiria. In fact, for Sorey, the idea of sharing experiences is one which he strives towards, and perhaps those shared experiences aren't limited to the events within the game. If any of you have seen my previous analysis video on why Mickleo is best boy, you'll know about my theory from the end of the video. For the benefit of the uninitiated, here it is in short. As you play through Tales of Zestiria, you experience things through Sorey's eyes, and hence your experience becomes coloured by his. This theory is one which a few people picked up on as something which really interested them, and to be honest, I couldn't stop thinking about how far the theory could go past those bounds. Hence, here we are, ready to delve into a new discussion about how Sorey acts as a lens for the audience. Just a quick warning, this video will contain major Tales of Zestiria game spoilers. If you want to avoid those, I'd recommend coming back once you've watched a Let's Play or played the game if you can. So what does it mean for Sorey to act as a lens? In short, it means that we as the audience use him as a filter for the game and everything which happens in it. If you've heard of rose-coloured glasses, lenses with a metaphorical pink tint which make everything seem good, it's a little bit like that. We spend the entire game seeing everything through Sorey's point of view, which affects how we understand the events taking place and the other people we meet. I believe that this is the case because of the way the game is set up. In Tales of Zestiria, you are forced constantly to play as Sorey, unable to change the character running around on screen, and often made to use him as your main fighter in boss battles, where the game changes your entire party setup. It's interesting to note that in most of these cases, Sorey has Mickleo as his Seraph pair in the fights, even if the enemy is resistant to water. A few times you are forced to fight as Sorey alone. We both start and end the game alone with Sorey, no other party members at our side. The list of examples goes on, but I think you get the gist of it. Since we're seeing through Sorey's vision, however, what does that mean for our experience of the game? And why would the game implement something like this on purpose? I believe that the idea of Sorey as a lens contributes to two major themes in Tales of Zestiria, which are understanding people and the senses. One of the key things we learn about Sorey and Mickleo is that it is their dream to see humans and Seraphim live in coexistence, just as it was in the days of yore. This is the biggest factor which makes Sorey become the shepherd and hence makes the game go forward at all. But to look at it plainly, their dream boils down to this: get everyone to understand people who are not like them and have them live together again. Understanding people can be difficult, even for Sorey, but luckily we gain a similar level of understanding to Sorey about the Seraphim pretty early on. They're divine beings who act pretty much like regular humans, except they can use incredible elemental magic, and they always look young and beautiful, even if they're thousands of years old. Well, I don't know if I'd call Seraphim beautiful necessarily, but you know. Even if they're a different race, and a heavenly one at that, we get a sense of equality from the beginning, exemplified by the relationship between Sorey and Mickleo. Though Mickleo is one of the heavenly Seraphim, he is just as much of a ruins nerd as Sorey, and he is still young and inexperienced. He acts nothing like a divine being, which is likely what makes him so surprised when Alicia talks to him so politely when they first meet properly. The point is that we are able to see, perceive and understand the Seraphim, who most humans cannot, thanks to Sorey's influence, which is both his incredible resonance and the image he has crafted of the Seraphim over his years of living with them. Sorey doesn't see the people of Elysia as gods, but as his family, as equals. When one talks about understanding people, it's useful to look at the flip side of that as well, in that sometimes Sorey just doesn't understand, though he tries his best to do so. For example, with the likes of Maltran and Cardinal Fortin, he actively searches for information as to why the two of them became Hellions, even though that information may not strictly be necessary in attempting to purify the two of them. The same goes for Heldalf, who the game makes a huge plot point of getting you to find information about through multiple tedious fetch quests. Also worth mentioning is Zavid, who Sorey only begins to understand more clearly after he joins the party, and Sorey works to convince him to stop killing the Hellions. As Sorey gains understanding about these people, so do we, which allows us to learn alongside him and to understand the answer he comes up with at the end of the game. We also learn alongside him about the world outside of Elysia, travelling with him for the first time to all of these new places and experiencing them together. As he starts to understand the world around him, so do we. There are other things which Sorey misses because he doesn't understand them, like social cues and remarks about romance and things which are ordinary to most of us because we've grown up with them, which separates us from him in that respect. However, I think we can still empathise with Sorey's lack of understanding. A lens can only affect perception, not change it completely. There's still a gap between your eyes and his. Obviously, the game also has limitations when it comes to how much you can experience at the same time as Sorey, and there will always be things which you miss out on because Sorey experienced it far earlier than you, and you don't get all of the context until later. Sometimes these are small things, like discussions about ruins and the Celestial Record, but other times it can affect the plot. Two moments which I feel demonstrate the gap between our perception and Sorey's are the skit The Unspoken Bond and the last Bell scene at the end of the game. The Unspoken Bond is a skit in which Sorey and Micleo talk very, very vaguely about a plot point which is only discovered to the audience a little later on. At first glance, it appears to be an impenetrable conversation between two people who understand each other better than you ever could hope to understand them. But once you learn the truth, that Sorey is blind in his right eye, the skit gains a new level of depth. It's truly masterful in being as vague as possible while alluding heavily to something which is affecting Sorey so deeply. Though we might not understand it at the same time as Sorey and Micleo do, the game tries to make it so that you do understand by leaving hints as to what might be happening. A few times Sorey wobbles, the right side of the screen going dark as he does so. In skits, Micleo will switch to which side of Sorey he's standing on depending on what's happening, and in fights and cutscenes he generally stays on the right instead of the left. Though these are all obvious clues in hindsight, however, it can be unclear when seeing them for the first time. In my first playthrough, I simply thought that Sorey was exhausted, and I didn't recognise Micleo's changing sides. Still, the game makes some effort to give the audience some clarity on the matter, and to offer that same perception through the eyes of Sorey. Sometimes you are so close to the subject at hand that you cannot see the details of it clearly. The last Bell scene, however, is a tougher nut to crack. The game drops hints of Sorey's answer throughout its run, which are evident in the theme of the senses in the game. However, unless one is very, very perceptive, it's unlikely they expect Sorey's answer to have been alluded to in a comedic scene hours and hours long past. Why, after all, would the audience jump to the conclusion that Sorey could purify Maltalis by closing off his senses? It's not something that comes up for a while before they reach Last Bell, after all. The audience can easily forget about the scene in which Micleo makes reference to, which Sorey uses to explain his decision. But that's the thing. Sorey is a lens, or a vessel. We are seeing through his eyes, but that doesn't mean we can't feel our own emotions and also lack in things which Sorey does have, like his incredible memory. As Laphicet says in Tales of Zestiria,
"But I can't read her thoughts or her emotions. Sitting in a box doesn't teach you how the box feels."
Perhaps in this case, that means that understanding Sorey's emotions truly relies on the empathy of the audience. I've already alluded to this several times, but Sorey acting as a lens is a heavy nod towards the theme of the senses in Tales of Zestiria. All 5 senses have their roles in the game, although sight is the one with the most prevalence. The game hinges on the idea of people being able to see or not see Seraphim, and often understanding people is known as seeing where they're coming from. When Sorey gives some of his resonance to Alicia, it is his sight which is affected, and Dezel's trauma caused him to lose his sight completely. Metaphorically too, when characters lose their sight, it often alludes to a more psychological kind of losing sight. Dezel loses sight of his original wishes, dropping his dream of staying with the Windriders in order to seek revenge. Sorey, on the other hand, loses sight of other people's concerns for him. He acts without thinking of how his actions might worry the people around him, and ends up hurting himself in the long run. This, one could argue, is something which Sorey does right from the get-go anyway, but I think he becomes rasher during the time when his sight is affected, through to the time when Rose joins the party. After all, in the gap between Alicia leaving and Rose joining, Sorey loses sight of something else, his friends, the Seraphim. Though his ordinary vision has been restored to 2020, when he faces up against Heldalf, which is another decision made rashly without thinking much of the concerns his friends have for him, Sorey loses his resonance, which is almost like literally going blind for him. All his life, Sorey has been able to perceive the Seraphim, and likewise we've been able to see them this whole time too, thanks to Sorey. However, when he loses them, so do we. Even with their individual characteristics, the Seraphim act as a kind of moral compass for Sorey, guiding him in the direction which will most likely help him to achieve his goals. They worry constantly for him, which is why they didn't want him facing off against Heldalf and Gleaming Basin. When Sorey loses the Seraphim, that moral compass is gone. Thus, his first big decision is that he wants to return to the battlefield, a notion which his Seraph friends know is a terrible idea and persuade him against doing. You can see how he loses sight of his true goal during this short time of losing his resonance. He forgets his dream to have humans and Seraphim live in coexistence, and tries instead to focus on stopping the Lord of Calamity. Admittedly, he probably thinks that the best way to get humans and Seraphim to live together is to stop malevolence, which can only be done by stopping the Lord of Calamity. Calamity, but that is not a long-term solution. After all, another Lord of Calamity could rise while he's searching for an answer to his other problem, if they manage to defeat the first one at all. It's almost like when Sorey loses his resonance and his way, we as the audience lose perception of him to a certain extent. After all, I think it's probably common for people who have played the game to have known it was a bad idea to go back to the battlefield after losing his resonance. For a short time, our lens wavers and our understanding of him does as well. Regaining his resonance, having 20/20 vision, and gaining the help of a true comrade who has different sight but the same vision are all things which help Sorey to perceive the world more clearly, and in turn allow us as the audience to understand fully once more. Another aspect I find interesting in regards to Sorey and the senses is that, at the end of the game, our vision of what happens in the world ends with Sorey closing off his senses. When he cannot experience the world, neither can we, the audience. In the end credits, we don't get to see the hundreds of years passing him by as he sleeps, but rather we see the fond memories which he's probably telling Motelis about as they sleep. Our experience is limited only to what we can experience with Sorey. With that in mind, the second epilogue scene becomes clearer, I think. We see Mikleo walking around some ruins, mostly from far away. This is likely Sorey's vision, him finally seeing his friend after so long. And once we get a glimpse of Sorey, it's only his silhouette. It's unclear because we are still seeing through his eyes. All that is certain is the ruins and Mikleo, the two things which Sorey experiences as he reaches down into the hole and grabs Mikleo's hand to save him. Now, obviously this device is not entirely infallible due to the limited nature of the game in telling the story in this way. The final scenes with Dezel utilise this device in order to enrich in the storytelling. However, they ultimately fail. In trying to allow us as the audience to learn at the same rate as Sorey, we do not get to know about Dezel's past until Simone forcibly shows it to us in a vision, at which point we are given a ham-fisted info dump of everything they could have foreshadowed far better before this point. Even though the shock we feel is the same as Sorey's at that moment, it still feels unsatisfying because of the way in which we are told about it and the nature of the events which follow. Perhaps at this point, it would have been better if the game had not utilised the plot device of seeing through Sorey's eyes, allowing the audience to learn more about Dezel's past earlier on, possibly from his own mouth. Either that, or Sorey could have learned more about it in skits and cutscenes. However, it's easy to tell what they were trying to do with these scenes, even if the intended effect came out a little burnt. Another reason as to its fallibility is that one could argue that every video game is meant to be like this. You're supposed to support your main character and see through their eyes, that's just the nature of storytelling. However, I'd like to argue that this game utilises the device of Sorey as a lens to a different and more meaningful extent because of how important the aforementioned themes are to the game's story. After all, not every game tells a story of sight and understanding and connection in the same way that this game does. Even the other Tales games act differently, allowing you more freedom in which characters you want to play as at whatever time, except perhaps for moments where it's more prudent to be playing as a specific character. In some Tales games there are even moments when the main protagonist is not in your active party simply because everyone was split up and you need to reunite them. In Tales of Zestiria there is no such freedom. From the beginning we are tethered to Sorey and we stick with him right until the end. This, I believe, creates the effect of Sorey as a lens through which we perceive the game, allowing us to understand it as closely as we can to how Sorey does. But that's just my opinion. If you have any thoughts on this topic, let me know down below. I'd love to see your different thoughts and theories. While you're down there, feel free to leave me suggestions for future analysis videos if you like. I'm hoping to upload one a month if I can keep to my schedule, so I'd love to hear your ideas. I had a great time looking through all of the reactions to my last video, which I'd like to thank so many people for supporting. I didn't expect it to have such an amazing reception, and I can't help but be amazed and grateful for all of the support and lovely comments on that, so thank you for that. If you didn't already know, I have a Let's Play of Tales of Zestiria, which is, at the time of recording this, on its 16th episode. New episodes come out every Monday and Friday. I'll leave a link in the description and a card in the corner for a playlist of those episodes if you'd like to catch up. Thank you so much for watching this video all the way through and for your lovely support. I hope you have a great day, night, or whatever other time it is for you, and I will see you next time.